freedom of state officials from church power and privilege. However, after a generation of experimentation, even the Protestant churches and Protestant states had returned to their own version of the two-soul theory. And in those cases, maybe the shift was that the state controlled the church and set limits on its doctrine or articulated or its rules and regulations. It had great control within the church. It was a two-soul theory in a different way. So even after that great reaction to, I suppose, the strength of, and I suppose some of the abuses of the Catholic Church in medieval Europe, the Protestant churches, in their own way, followed the same. So the Christian churches have tried to impose their norms on the state to exclude from the religious and civil communities those who did not subscribe to their belief system. Likewise, we can't ignore how often the Christian hierarchy has legitimized with Scripture the inferiority of women and have declared the superiority of divine law over civil law. So we have very mixed, that's the kind of first 1500 years, but we've seen the dangers maybe of where any religious faith tries to take over the role of the state. So we've learned a very hard lesson ourselves, and perhaps the important thing is we learn from the lesson, and that we've been taught a lesson too by history and the abuses of let's say, church or a religious faith which takes too much control in the area of the state. So then we move in, that was the first 15 years, so we're up to the Reformation and so on. Perhaps one of the biggest shocks to the church and also to faith was the Enlightenment. But it was a welcome shock in many ways because it helped faith in Western Europe to some degree, but it was also a big shock to the Catholic Church and to the Christian churches in other ways. The concept of religious freedom, as we know today, very slowly was not realized really until the last century, although long advocated by various Christian thinkers, and particularly by the free churches of the Radical Reformation. Now, even though the Reformation did not espouse the principle of religious freedom, it did represent a revolt against authority and in turn fostered the emergence of nation states, which were to play a part in the emergence of religious freedom and a new secular spirit. And how that emerged too is because you have then, in this sense, that like for the Christian state, as history has shown, is as much an enemy of the true religion and religious freedom. And that this Christian state, in the emergence of the state, then that you have a new religious pluralism. Obviously, the wars, the religious wars that took place between various Christian states at that time, there was the fragmentation of Christendom, a tragedy in its own right, but it can also claim to be one of the sources of religious freedom, although obviously not thought so at the time. The right of Catholics and Protestants to restrict the rights of dissenters or heretics was gradually eroded, and religious freedom as a principle came to be widely espoused. And that was the result of the fragmentation of Christendom, that they had to represent, with the movement of Christians from one Christian state to another, they had to recognize the existence of those Christians. They couldn't just exclude a growing number of Christians or Catholics in Protestant countries, or Protestants in Catholic countries, and grant them gradually over time tolerance, which gave way, and you had the Edict of Tolerance, of course, in France and so on. These things began to set the seeds of the toleration of religion, and also of religious freedom within the state. As I said, though, the Enlightenment was the greatest challenge to Christianity. It resulted in the maturing of the Christian faith and a healthier relationship between church and state, resulting in an ideological and confessional pluralism, which guarantees more than any law an appropriate equilibrium between church and state. It was the inherent teaching of the distinctive autonomy of church and state in Christianity that facilitated, though, the gradual kind of separatism. So it wasn't something new, it was already there from the beginning. We said that about Christian dualism, it was already, but the focus of it had changed over time. For example, as I said at the beginning, it was protect the church from paganism, pagan state. Later times it was used to indicate the rights of the church over the state in a very broad Christian purpose. Still, that autonomy of the religious, of the church, or of the faith from the political world was still there, and there was a kind of innate, inherent kind of separatism between them. Now, one of the most earliest and most influential thinkers was John Locke, from 1632 to 1704, who wrote the famous letter concerning toleration in 1639. And in it he said the church basically was saying is, and this would apply in societies to any religious faith or religion, that it is voluntary. It's something you subscribe to yourself, it's internal, voluntary. The church or any religious body is a body of people who